Chapter 4 of All the World by Charles Monroe Sheldon. This Librivox Recording is in the public domain. Recording by Adele de Pignerolles. Chapter 4 While Dick sat in his room debating the chances of his choice coming in conflict with his love of the dearest girl in the world, Dr. Ward was having another experience at the close of this notable day. His daughter Esther had come in with her mother. Mrs. Ward and her daughter had been in the library during the conference in the study, and Esther had lingered on the porch with Bert Chandler after the rest of the young men had gone. Dr. Ward saw at once that there was something of great moment between mother and daughter. But the war had filled all of life so full of the exciting and unexpected that any event had to be very extraordinary to arouse a thrill in either heart or head. "It's the last thing in the world I ever expected," the mother was saying, as she came into the room. "I never dreamed of it," the girl was answering. The colour on her cheeks was vivid, and her eyes glowed with great animation. "Esther tells me Bert is determined to go," Mrs. Ward said, as she looked from daughter to husband. "So far it seems to me he has been rather determined to stay," the doctor whimsically remarked as he looked at the clock. "Father!" Esther exclaimed, as she laughed at his banter, "you must know what mother means." "Yes. It's what you have been going over here tonight." Mrs. Ward spoke before the doctor could reply to Esther. "After all we had planned, don't you see, we are going to lose both of our children, and we had so made up our minds that after this dreadful separation, and uncertainty, and loss," Mrs. Ward's look rested on Albert's picture on his father's desk, "it did seem as if we might have been allowed to comfort those who were spare to us. But I will not complain, John, only my spirit is like the mother's in Patriarch Pierce's lament. You remember, John, the mother who lost her two sons at the battle of the Marne, the second battle. I do not grudge them, Lord, I do not grudge, my two strong sons that I have seen go out, to break their strength and die, they and a few, in bloody protest for a glorious thing. They shall be spoken of among their people. The generations shall remember them, and call them blessed. But I will speak their names to my own heart, in the long nights, the little names that were familiar once round my dead hearth. Lord, thou art hard on mothers, we suffer in their coming and their going, and though I grudge them not, I weary of the long sorrow, and yet I have my joy. My sons were faithful and they fought." "But he, the good God, spared one of ours," said John Ward, gently, after a moment of silence. "Only to take the other away!" Mrs. Ward burst out, suddenly breaking down, to the doctor's real consternation, for she had not done that, even at the news of Albert's death. "And Esther, too, if she goes with Bert! Lord, thou art hard on mothers." Esther tried to comfort her, while Dr. Ward sat dumb. "It will take Bert 2 or 3 years to get ready to go anywhere. You will have us all that time anyway." "I had forgotten that." Mrs. Ward suddenly sat up and smiled. "Of course it will. I kept thinking you were going right off." "By the new plan outlined by the seminaries, young men like Bert can get ready to go out in 1 year," said the doctor. "We have all that to go over in making our plans. But there is going to be a lot of adventure about the whole thing. Do you know, Dick is wondering what Recwa's father will say." Both Mrs. Ward and Esther exclaimed, and Esther said decidedly, "Recwa will never go against her father's wishes. I know her too well." "Dick is afraid of Randall. Think of that, Sarah. A boy who wears the Croix de Guerre, afraid of his future wife's father." "That girl," said Esther, with determination, "has been one of the last to find out and feel the influence of the war on the women of the world. I love Recwa, and she is a splendid girl, and she loves Dick and worships him, but she is afraid of her father, and you know, daddy, why—" Esther did not finish her sentence, and Dr. Ward did not either, but all three seemed aware of a chill in the room, which was dispelled when Dr. Ward said, "Do you know what time it is, folks?" "1 o'clock," said Mrs. Ward, as she rose. "But yesterday was a great day. What it will mean to those young men no one can ever tell." "Or to the young women either, father." "How? What's that?" Dr. Ward turned to his daughter, the surprises of the day not yet over. "You know the girls in my class. They were greatly stirred by your sermon, daddy. They want to do something. And there's Alberta. Since Albert's going out, she must do something to fill life's cup for her. There are at least 6 of my girls, I believe, who want to get into some kind of service for all the world. Small things do not interest them any more. Only the biggest can appeal to them now." Do you mean to say that 6 of those high school girls in your class will actually consider the commission to go into the world to make disciples?" "Father," Esther said, coming up to him and putting her hand on his head, "it is too late to tell all about it tonight. The girls would have been in to see you about it if the boys hadn't come. It's a great story they will have to tell you if they talk to you as they have to me. I don't believe even you really understand what the war has done for girls and women." "I don't, except when I look at you. You're not the same girl you were when the war broke out." "I hope not, Daddy. But you're tired after such a day. We'll go over it all in the morning." Next morning at the breakfast table, the Ward family did what they always did, following the habit the children had known for years, in fact, ever since they were born. They discussed at the table the things they had been talking over when they parted at night. And there were few secrets in the Ward family. What concerned one of them concerned all. Even Esther's and Dick's love chapter in life was freely read by them to the father and mother, and on this occasion it played so vital a part in the future plans of all of them that it could not possibly be avoided even if anyone had wished. "Bert is the last fellow in the world I should have thought of as a missionary," said Dick, following some remark his sister had made about his own choice. "He isn't any more cut out for it than I am, but he told me yesterday he believed he had never felt more certain about anything since he volunteered in 241. "Bert has plenty of qualifications for missionary service," said Esther, with her usual determined air. "He likes people of all sorts, he is not afraid of any kind of circumstances, he learns languages easily, he can adapt himself to any sort of climate, he has perfect health, he is very persuasive." "Ha, ha! Exactly what Requa said of my qualifications as a foreign missionary. When we come to make our applications for missionary service, all Bert and I will have to do will be to refer the secretaries or the board to our respective brides, who know all about us." "And you will not be far out of the way, sir. I don't believe you realize, Dick, while you've been gone, how fast and far women have gone in learning to make quick judgment and to measure up to large opportunities. That's one reason you boys will have to do some pretty good thinking and hard work if you keep up with us, or fill the places you left when you went away." Dick answered soberly, admiring his sister's determination and her general air of wide awakeness. "Bert and I haven't begun to catch on yet to the new things to which we have come back, if that is a good American language. Why, I didn't even know that the saloons were gone from Bradford until I went down on the street Saturday on the way to Requa's. It doesn't seem possible, Dad. How you used to pray for that day, but I never believed it would happen." "We haven't had a saloon or a brewery in the whole state," said Dick's father calmly. "What?" "Not a saloon in the whole state," Dr. Ward repeated. "While you have been fighting over there, we've been fighting over here." Dick had risen in his excitement. As he sat down, he said, "I don't see what there is left for you to preach about, Dad, if the saloons are gone." "There are a number of things left." "And we have women's suffrage since you went away, Dick," his mother added. Dick began to look bewildered, and Esther chimed in, "There's hardly a man left in the flour mill or the furniture shops, and I suppose you noticed Alberta is in McAlpin's old place at the ticket office down at the depot." Dick looked from Esther to his mother and then to his father, and after a moment of astonished silence he broke into a laugh, but it was a laugh that had questions in it. "We got very little news on the fighting line. We were making European history, didn't have time to note what was going on at home. On the way home, what do you folks think was the main topic of our talk and interest?" Father and mother and sister looked their keen interest, and Dick provokingly said, "Sometime I'll tell you, but it wasn't prohibition, or women's suffrage, or government ownership of railroads, telegraph and telephone service. I expect to be surprised every day at something new in America, but somehow it doesn't excite me much until I find about Requa and her father." "But you and Bert will never understand the greater part of the new order of things in America, Dick, if you don't know and understand something of the part that the women of America played during the war. I suppose you heard of the Red Cross over there?" Dick rose from his place at the table and gravely saluted. "That's for the Red Cross. If there was one thing we did know it was that. Yes, that and the Y.M.C.A. Some day I'll begin to tell you folks what it all meant to me." "But," Esther persisted, "do you know what the women of America did in the Red Cross? We're not jealous of the Y.M.C.A., but I don't believe even the people here at home begin to know what the Red Cross owes to the women of America. Daddy, you know I was appointed statistical secretary for our division to get the exact facts for the second year of the war, and here is what I found out. In 1 year of the war, the women of America planted 800,000 war gardens, out of which were raised $350 million worth of crops. 460 million quarts of food were preserved from these gardens in 8 months, and 1 million loaves of bread saved each day. In addition to that, 8 million women worked in 50,000 Red Cross workrooms. In 6 weeks they delivered 3,681,895 surgical dressings, 1,517,076 pieces of hospital linen, 424,550 hospital garments, 240,621 knitted articles, and 301,563 miscellaneous supplies. During the entire year, 13 million articles were sent abroad, 3 million surgical dressings went every month to France, and $36 million worth of garments for our own boys.
"Wait! I never knew you had such a memory!" cried Dick, in genuine astonishment. "She never used to have any, Dick," Dr. Ward exclaimed. "She has made a memory where there wasn't any."
Dick looked with undisguised admiration at his sister.
"If the war has done as much for all the women as it has done for you, sister, it surely is a new world we have come back into. But I don't believe they are all like you. You don't mean to say, do you, that those figures represent official and United States facts?"
The breakfast was getting cold. The Ward family had paused in the act of eating to digest Esther's figures. She had pushed back her chair from the table, and was sitting there with a look of meditation. If any one except her brother had asked such a question she would have been indignant, but she smiled as she said, "Your ignorance of the world you have come back into is excusable. You and Bert and all the boys are going to be astonished a good many times. It's a new America and a new world. And I do feel for the first time that I've some real place in it. Just think, Dick, of the 766,202 professional women in this country. Yes, Daddy, I am going to practice on you folks, now I have got to going, with my report as secretary. In the fine arts there are 20,393 women listed in the Women's Who's Who, 685 clergy, 490,250 teachers, 1,787 lawyers, 7,502 authors and editors, 144,451 are practicing medicine, 84,478 are teaching music, and 3,250 are in scientific pursuits as architects, chemists, civil and electrical engineers. Did you know that one little Frenchwoman was at the head of the hospital at Verdun for 17 months? You must have heard of her. For 6 weeks she worked there without taking her clothes off. And now she's médecin en chef of the Hôpital Militaire in Paris. 10 hospitals in Europe are staffed entirely by women. 7 great London hospitals have women resident physicians in charge. Endell Street Hospital, the greatest London war hospital, was staffed entirely by women. And did you know our Red Cross has been asked by France and Serbia for hospitals staffed by women? Didn't the boys find out that the place to go when they were wounded was the women's hospital in Paris? Dick did not answer, as Esther paused in her tumultuous statistics. The mere figures seemed to be of little interest to him by the side of one sentence. "Who was that doctor at Verdun? What did you say was her name?" "Why, it was Dr. Nicole Gerard Manging. When she sent in her application for an appointment as acting surgeon, she left off her first name, and the War Office supposed it was a man. When she appeared with her surgeon's kit at the Vosges front, with a government commission, the medicine-in-chief at that point threw up his hands in dismay at the sight of this little woman. And yet there were 1,000 wounded soldiers at that point, and only 5 doctors. They had to let her get to work. And she assisted in 4 days at 600 operations, and never lost a case. Surely you must have heard of her?" "Heard of her? Of Dr. Nicole Gerard Mangin? Why, she is the doctor that amputated my arm and saved my shoulder." In his excitement, Dick had risen so suddenly that he knocked a cup and saucer off the table. No one paid any attention to it. Dick was waving his left arm enthusiastically. Esther was staring hard, while her eyes glowed. "How splendid! But you never wrote us about it. How I should like to see her perform an operation!" "Do you mean on me?" Dick laughed, as he sat down. "But how is it you did not write us about it?" Mrs. Ward asked. Dick looked ashamed. "You know, mother, what a careless correspondent I was, and I kept saying I would tell it all when I came home. And there was Requa to write to, and as soon as I was able to leave Paris and join the company, the thing was all over and I was on board. But Dr. Nicole! You can't tell me anything about her. Why, the boys saw her oftener than they saw Persing or Foch. And I shall carry her skill with me as long as I live." It was all so wonderful that a silence followed, broken finally by Dick, who, as he stooped over to pick up the broken cup and saucer, said,
I might as well get right over and see Mr. Randall this morning." Dr. Ward looked at Mrs. Ward as if seeking an answer to the question they had been debating before the breakfast hour. He seemed to read his answer in her returning look, and with a good deal of reluctance he said, as Dick put the pieces of broken crockery on the table, "Dick, we feel, your mother and I, that you ought to know a somewhat disagreeable fact before you go to see Mr. Randall. You haven't been home long enough to learn about things, and it may help you in your interview with him to know the facts from us, rather than have them come to you by way of those who are less friendly." Dick sat down again, looking intently at father and mother and sister, all of whom returned his look with unusual gravity. "The plain fact is," Dr. Ward continued, with characteristic family bluntness, "that Mr. Randall is a profiteer, and has made a large part of his recent fortune by evading government regulations. He has not yet done anything illegal to the extent of putting himself in reach of the law, but a few weeks ago he was under suspicion of such shrewd practice in the manipulation of warehouse securities that he may fall under government indictment and arrest. Have you heard anything of this?" "No!" Dick's one word was like a hand grenade. His face was white, and he clutched the tablecloth with a grip that made his mother, sitting opposite, apprehensive that he might drag all the dishes off the board. "Why, he is a traitor!" Dick exploded. Dr. Ward said gently, "Bradford will give him the benefit of every doubt. Randall has lived here all his life. He has built up the shops, and always been fair in his dealings with the men, and generous in public ways with his money. He built the new hospital here the first year of the war. The people will be slow to accuse him, and yet I am obliged to believe that he has been caught up in the great temptation which has caught so many of our business men in the unprecedented opportunities which war conditions have afforded to pile up enormous gains in a short time." But Dick did not appear to listen. His face was white and stern. "I wish I didn't have to know this. It doesn't seem possible that Rekwa's dad is a traitor. Yes, he is, Dad, a traitor." Dick spoke hotly, answering a silent protest he saw in his father's gesture. "Why, in England they would shoot men for things like that. Even if he was not legally and technically guilty of profiteering, if he has taken advantage of the war to make a fortune, or to take advantage of the public, he is a traitor. He is not a true American." Dr. Ward had never seen Dick angry before. He was not simply angry in any superficial or temporary feeling, but thoroughly stirred by his father's statement about Randall. It seemed to him like a monstrous thing that while the young men were risking their lives and all they held dear in the name of real patriotism, the older men, safe at home, should see in the awful tragedy of the world only a good chance to make big money. It did not make any difference if a great number of men, some of them high in the business world, did the same. They were all guilty of treason and deserved the punishment of traitors. "I thought you ought to know the worst from us before you went to see him about Rekwa," his father was saying gently. "It may be he can justify some of his business moves. I am not judging him, but he is, as I have told you, under shrewd government suspicion right now. It will not make it any easier for you to see him." Dick had already started to go out. "Dad, I'm not afraid of him any more. I can't be afraid of any man for whom I have no respect." "But he is Rekwa's father, Dick. You cannot forget that," his mother said anxiously. "I shall not forget that either, mother," said Dick softly, but his face was still pale and his look stern. "Be careful, son." Dr. Ward spoke calmly. "Remember what you are going to see him about. You are not his judge and executioner. The state will take care of that. What other rights you have are invested in Rekwa, who has pledged you faithfully to be your wife and share in your future. You are both old enough to make your own choices. But Randall is not all bad. He might—" Dick cast one look around at the three still seated at the table, and went slowly out. They heard him go upstairs to his room, and after a few minutes he came down, seemed to hesitate in the hall, but finally opened the door and went out. Esther went to the window to wave a hand at him, as she used to do before Dick went away. She was greatly disturbed because he did not turn to wave his hand at her in reply. He went up the street without turning his head, and crossed over to go up to Rekwa's. Esther was crying as she came back to the table. "I never saw Dick so upset. Do you think, father, it was wise to tell him about Mr. Randall?" "Yes. He would have had to know it soon, anyway, and perhaps from some of Randall's political enemies. But it is hard for Dick to face all this right now." Chapter 5